Chet, I believe everyone is here and we are now live on YouTube.
Great, thanks, Nicole. I was just looking around the room. Joe, you didn't have to call in from vacation. It looks pretty pleasant there.
Vacation is nice this time of year.
Yeah. So I'm excited to get started. Let's go ahead and call the meeting to order. For those who are new to the group, my name is Chet Parsons. I'm the Director of Transportation for Plan RVA, and we are staffing the Central Virginia Transportation Authority. So this is a meeting of the TPO's Public Transportation Work Group. And welcome, everyone. Hope your Friday is going well and you're looking forward to a nice warm weekend. I wanted to go ahead and get started with the agenda. I think we do have our main item of business today is a kickoff session with the team from AECOM on the Transit Service Governance Report. So let's hold off and let Stephanie and her team introduce themselves at that point. I think everybody else on the call is familiar with each other, but let's go around and this is always awkward in a virtual call, but how about if I just call on folks and you can introduce yourself and who you're representing. So let's start with John O'Keefe.
Yeah, I'm John O'Keefe. I'm with the Ride Finders, a division of GRTC Transit, and we handle the TDM component of ride sharing in the Richmond area.
Thanks. Dirona?
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Dirona Moore-Clark. I am the administrator for the Office of Equitable Transit and Mobility, and I am representing the City of Richmond.
Thank you. Joe, you want to go next?
Hi, I'm Joe Vidunas. I'm the transportation engineer for Hanover County.
Thanks. Lisa?
Lisa Guthrie, Executive Director of the Virginia Transit Association.
And Lisa is also representative of our Community Transportation Advisory Committee.
And that too, yes.
Sharon, do you want to go next?
Sure. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Sharon Smidler. I represent Henrico, Department of Public Works. I'm the Transportation Development Division Director.
Thank you. Tiffany.
Good afternoon. I'm Tiffany Dubinsky. I'm one of the statewide transit planners with the Department of Rail and Public Transportation, and I tend to be a representative for the Richmond TPO area.
Thanks. Barb?
Hi, I'm Barb Smith with Chesterfield County Transportation. I'm an engineer for them.
Great. And Adrian?
I'm Adrian Torres. I'm the Director of Planning and Scheduling at GRTC.
Great. And then I think from our staff, Ken, you want to introduce yourself?
Yes, good afternoon. Ken Lance. I'm the Mobility Coordinator with Plan RVA.
And Nicole.
Good afternoon. My name is Nicole Mueller with the Richmond Regional Transportation Planning Organization and Plan RVA.
Great. Thanks, Nicole. So looking at the agenda, moving to, well, I guess we should do, did you get a roll call there, Nicole? Okay. Let's go to item 1. Everyone hopefully has seen the agenda. As I said, the bulk of business today is working with the AECOM team under item 3. Does anyone have any other amendments or business to be added to the agenda this afternoon? Okay, hearing none, we'll move on to item 2. Included in your packet was the meeting summary from our January 5th meeting. Anyone have any updates or changes that you would propose? If not, I'd entertain a motion to approve.
Also,
Sorry, I think we missed that. Was that Lisa? Okay, is there a second?
Yeah, this is John. I'll second it.
Great, thanks. So motion by Lisa, second by John. Okay, all in favor, say aye.
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 Any opposed? Great, thank you. So let's move into item 3. And I'm going to turn this over to our AECOM team. Stephanie, you should be able to share your screen now. And if you wanted to just take a second and introduce your key folks on the call with us, that'd be great. Thanks.
Sure, thank you, Chet. So 1 second. Okay, is that better? Can everyone see the presentation slide and on my desktop? Okay, great. So thank you for having us. My name is Stephanie Amwini Yangson. I'm with AECOM and I'm a transportation consultant with AECOM's Strategic Planning Services Group. On the call with me are Peter Voorhees, and I'll let them introduce themselves as well. Peter Voorhees, Scott Baker, Peter Joyce, and then our partner from the ENO Foundation, Mr. Robert Puentes. So Peter, do you have a few words?
Sure, Stephanie, thank you, and good afternoon, everyone. Nice to meet with you on a Friday afternoon. Yes, Peter Voorhees. I am a transportation planning manager, and I'm the contract manager for services that we perform through our contract with Virginia DRPT. And I'll be acting as project manager, but Stephanie is really the one you want to get to know here. And she's going to be the thought leader who's going to be able to help you through this governance structure study. And but I'm always available to address any needs with project performance and all that. But Stephanie is really the one to get to know here. And why don't I hand it over to Scott Baker?
So thanks, Peter. Scott Baker. I'm really just a kibitzer here. I'm with AECOM, but just so you know the background, I did work in transit operations in via Metropolitan Transit for 12 years, and at Pittsburgh Port Authority, Allegheny County for 4 years before coming into consulting. And I have consulted on a number of similar engagements over the years, so I'll be available to Stephanie and you all as you may need me during the project. Back to Stephanie, I think.
Yeah, Peter.
Peter Joyce.
Yes, hi everybody. My name is Peter Joyce. There are 2 Peters on the AECOM team speaking. Forgive us for that. I'm a transportation planner and I've worked recently with VDOT and WMATA on some of their capital prioritization and how the governance has impacted that work.
Thank you. Rob?
Good afternoon. I'm Robert Puentes. I'm the president and CEO of the ENO Center for Transportation, nonpartisan independent organization based in Washington, D.C. We do lots of work on governance and institutional issues with cities, states, metropolitan areas, transit agencies all around the country. Really looking forward to this project. Thank you.
Thank you, Rob. So we are really pleased to have ENO's wealth of knowledge and reach for this project. So they'll play a very integral role with him and Scott will be advising a lot on this project. So I'll go ahead and start with this. This is just an overview of the items that we'll be going through this afternoon. We've already introduced the project team. We'll give a brief understanding of the project background and allow time for you to give us any ideas or thoughts or basically the main objectives and goals for this project. I will share with you our basic project approach and just some questions for the project moving forward. And then finally, we'll share the project schedule with you. So again, this is going to be the project team. It's going to be an AECOM and ENO team. So this is going to be a very interesting project, I believe. So with the basic understanding, we know that CVTA is a newly established agency formed last year, 2020. And the purpose is going to be a funding agency to administer a new sales and use tax, as well as this a gas tax. So we understand that one of the main mandates for CVTA is to develop this governance report in order to understand the existing transit agencies in the region, the governance, to see whether they are formed, the existing processes are adequate and ensure that there's enough accountability to administering this fund. And so that will be the main goal and main objective for this project. And CVTA has a number of members that we throughout the Richmond region. So the table you're looking at is just the number of votes, as well as some of the non-voting members that are part of the CVTA. So we understand that these counties and cities are all stakeholders in this project. And we hope that our final deliverable will be well-pleasing and acceptable to everyone that is at the table. So like I said before, we understand that as CVTA, your main objectives are threefold. First is to review the governance structure for transit service in the existing transit in the region. And then you also want to review the potential, the possibility of creating a transportation district. So that is another thing we'll evaluate. And finally, determine the effectiveness of the existing policies that can assure accountability of the funds that you have. Are there any other key goals and objectives generally? That this is going to be just an open forum, and that's how I want this to be. I'll talk a little and then ask a few questions, but is there anything else that we should be taking note of that I haven't mentioned?
Stephanie, this is Barb Smith with Chesterfield. If there are deficiencies in the existing system process, will you all be developing some potential options to address deficiencies or new options to consider?
So we will, one of the key items would be developing options for governance, not necessarily how to correct the efficiencies, but recommendations on what can be done moving forward. So it may not be detailed implementation steps because this is a limited project, but we will, one of our final deliverables is a set of governance options based on the approach that I'll show you in the subsequent slides. Any other questions?
Yeah, Stephanie, I'm sorry, this is Diana, City of Richmond. I think this is exactly what Barb was saying too, just hoping that their options are identified that include new or enhanced governance structure that can guarantee representation of the local contributors, as well as again, just equity among all of the regional stakeholders as well. As far as the policies and the structure.
All right. Definitely. Thank you for that. I think that's an important factor, and we'll keep that in mind as we move forward with the study. So our project approach is basically just 4 main steps. The first is doing the strategic assessment, and that'll be of GRTC, looking at the different aspects in terms of the existing processes, the governance of the agency, as well as their funding mechanisms. The next portion is the evaluation of the transportation district, which is looking at the pros and cons of developing one, looking at other transportation districts that have been formed in the area, and comparing it to what the situation would be for the Richmond region. Finally, we'll use some peer studies that we worked on in phase 1 to develop a set of options for governance strategies for transit in the area. Typically, we'll compare them to what the status quo is. So based on these governance structures, we'll work with you, CVTA, and other stakeholders to develop whatever evaluation criteria that there are based on your own goals for the region. And based on these criteria, we'll try to narrow down and identify what are the best options for moving forward in the short term in terms of implementation strategies. And finally, we'll document everything in a nice old report. So just a little bit more detail. For the GRTC governance assessment, it was basically going to be an existing conditions review, looking at the funding structure. So how is it set up? How is the board set up? What is the membership of the board? What are the roles of the members of the board? How are they appointed? What are their voting? How is voting accomplished on the board? What are the service terms? So that kind of structure we'll be looking at, as well as how are general decisions made in terms of investments and other policies that are implemented within the agency. We'll also briefly look at the service within the area, their jurisdiction. And we'll also look at the funding, that is federal or state funding that is received, as well as any local funds, and how they're spent over the years to determine what the long-term impacts are and what the financial sustainability is for GRTC. Secondly, in this phase, we'll do a peer study. The peer study would be based on a number of factors. Even in selecting the peers, we're going to look first at what the policy environment is like. We know Virginia is a southern state, basically. So what is the policy environment culturally and economically in terms of spending or funding for transit services, comparing that to other agencies in the southern states, basically. We also want to look at how they're similar, how labor laws and labor arrangements are similar between the agencies and their contractors, or whether they have other like shell company with the contractors. Also just service standards and the policies within the agency in terms of how much service is provided. Typically, we know that depending on where in the country you are, the service per capita for different cities or regions may be more conservative or more or less, depending on where you go to. Finally, looking at the interjurisdictional relations. So this will include, so Richmond, for example, has the city, but then there are many outlying areas, and all these areas are stakeholders within the regional transit system. So looking at similarities within that area. And based on these, the examples below are not the final region selected, but there are just some places that come in mind that could be included in a PS study. So as we begin this phase, we'll do a more detailed assessment and submit to CVTA's team a list of agencies that we believe that would be good peers, or a list of regions, and then get your feedback on that. So we'll be doing between 4 and 5 peer studies compared to peer assessments, and compare that to the Richmond area. And but before I move forward, I wanted to ask if there are any regions that you usually compare, you see as peers to the Richmond area, because you may already have some thoughts on areas that you want to look at.
Stephanie, I'm not sure about peer areas, but I did want to say that on the first part, the governance review, as you and the team do the desktop review, I think it needs to be said that you'd probably gain a lot of understanding from coordinating directly with Adrienne and her board to get background information from them directly.
Okay.
Also related to that, what is I guess the time frame of the analysis as well that you're looking for financials and any sort of history? How far back do you go?
So typically we'll just want to look at maybe the last 5 years to look at any trend. And that will be based on, we'll definitely collect detailed information from you, and we'll use NTD data to supplement as well. But usually getting the information directly from the agency is much more accurate.
Okay.
And so if there are no thoughts on the peer areas or the peer regions, we'll do some research and then send to you a list for your consideration. Finally, we'll do a benchmarking as sort of like the cap for phase 1. So that will include a CVTA review. CVTA is a new agency, which is great, meaning that there's a lot of room to make, to improve the system. There isn't a lot of, there's just hope and room to improve it. So after we do the peer study and we identify what works and what doesn't work, what are the strengths, the weaknesses, what are some opportunities for the Richmond area, we'll benchmark CVTA's processes and structure against these. Particularly, we'll be looking at the Northern Virginia Transportation Authority and the Hampton Roads area, since those are other two authorities within the area, and come up with some good ways in which we can ensure that CVTA has the processes in place to make sure that the public has enough confidence that the funding is going to be used wisely. I think that's a question.
No, just notes.
Oh, okay. So phase 2 is going to be the evaluation of the transportation district. This is basically a very separate assessment that we'll look at. It will just be looking at the legislation and the laws that are in place or allowed for the state of Virginia, and doing like a pros and cons list, looking at what are the strengths and weaknesses and how would it benefit the Richmond area. And we know that the examples already in Richmond, looking at how we'll conduct some interviews with contacts, and we hope that CVTA can help us with getting the right contacts within these agencies to just talk to them and find out what the experience has been and what is anything that can be transferred to the Richmond area. So that is going to be phase 2 of this project. Once that is done, you'll have enough information to determine if it's something that you'll want to move forward with or not.
Can I ask something about that last transportation districts? I think from what I'm remembering, the legislation wanted us to look at transportation districts as they may relate to the transit governance issue. So you're going to tie it into that, right?
Exactly, yeah. So using the information that we collect from phases 1 and 2, in phase 3, we're now going to look at these governance strategies. What are the different combinations of governance structures that we may have seen from the peer studies that could be beneficial for the Richmond area? And if like you said, is it something that's going to be tied in with forming the transportation district or not? And we'll have some options to be evaluated. It's also we'll look at a number of different things, but we'll look at what is the ease of implementation in terms of legislation. Is there already enabling legislation that would make implementing whatever strategies that we pick or whatever options we pick easier, or will it become a long-term drawn-out process for maybe 10 more years or something like that? But we'll come up with, again, the evaluation criteria for selecting whatever the for selecting the final options are. In the report, though, I believe what we'll do is present the information for whether it's 3 or 4 options, and then have you determine or you decide what you're going to do with that information and how you're going to move forward with it. So we will identify the governance characteristics that is needed or that you want for the CVTA. And this will be through one-on-one interviews with the CVTA staff and other stakeholders. We'll finalize the options, and then, like I said, develop whatever the evaluation criteria are. Like, for example, what is the enabling legislation? How does it factor in equity? How does it factor in the funding that is already existing? And how does it ensure that the existing funds are, there's enough accountability to the use of these funds? So once we determine what options there are, we can move forward to the next phase of determining what are short-term implementation strategies that can be done within the short term. So maybe 1 to 5 years to make sure that this can move forward smoothly. Any questions or thoughts at this point? Okay, great. So each phase would have a series of tech memos. So once each phase is completed, we'll have some tech memos for the agency to review and get feedback to us. So at the end of this study, we're hoping to be able to just consolidate all of the tech memos and have a draft report for your review in time for any deadlines or internal timelines that you have to also keep to. Will also include summary presentations from the previous phases and any study files or data that is associated with the project. What you're looking at here is the tentative project schedule that we're proposing. So you'll see the red star indicates the project kickoff meeting, which is today, and the yellow oval shaped the yellow ovals are key deliverables that AECOM would be submitting. So with the 4 phases that are listed out, the 4 main phases, that is, we have the strategic assessment broken out to be completed somewhere in the second week of April. So the first deliverable is just going to be like a stepwise process, is starting with the GRTC assessment. So we'll need to get key contacts to speak to or to interview to be able to determine what just evaluate like GRTC on whole. So next week, we're going to have a series of email floods, and we hope Chet or Adrian, you'll help us with who the right people to speak to are and who we can get data from. Next, we'll submit to you a list of the peer agencies that we are planning to interview. We'll set up some phone calls with them and also give them like an interview guide. But we will present to you what the interview guide is so that you can have time to comment on it before we move forward with the interviews with these peer agencies. We'd also like to know if you'd want to be on any of those calls and participate in any way. So in that sense, I'd like to know if, I think Chet is our main contact, but if there's a smaller team or it's the translation working group, the work group that will be mainly working with. But I'd like us to also just talk about what the communication is like for the AECOM team with the CVTA staff. So we're hoping to also, we'll be done with the phase 1, like I mentioned, mid-April, and moving on to the evaluation of transportation district. With this schedule, we'll have the draft report ready by early June and have the final report by the June 25th, the week of June 25th, so that I can be ready for CVTA by the June 30th deadline. So this is what we are proposing. We are open to, if you have any questions or any other internal deadlines that we may not be aware of that will affect this schedule in any way. Maybe there's some meetings coming up or board presentations or board meetings that we would have to adjust our schedule with. We are definitely flexible and would like to know.
Hi, this is Diana with the City of Richmond. I think I heard the one-on-one with GRTC. But I know originally the proposal had like some kind of gathering meeting for everyone. I'm sorry if I missed it, but where is it that you'll be talking to localities or a set of group of people from, is that in the, did I miss it?
Yeah, so no. So that's with the benchmarking with CVTA. So that'll be in phase 1.
Okay. And
Yeah,
I think
phase 1.
maybe we discussed internally that we would just have to make sure our CVTA what members were aligned. Okay.
Yeah, so we had initially wanted to do a group, sort of a group meeting or a workshop, but we changed it to one-on-one calls so that it will be scheduled over a period of a week or so, or a week and a half for those one-on-one calls. Any other thoughts or questions?
This is Chet. Oh, go ahead, Adrian.
I'm sorry. Will there be kind of briefing meetings just as different steps are accomplished?
Yes. So the first line here, we have biweekly coordination calls, and those are shown in the black dots. And again, we can adjust the black squares to meet whatever internal, you may have certain meetings that you may want to give updates on. So we are definitely open to changing whatever the coordination calls are. It can be weekly, it can be bi-weekly, but here we showed it as the black square. So what would be a good timing for coordination calls? Who would be on the coordination calls? What is the communication going to be like?
So this is Chet. I think that my intent was that, as you mentioned, Stephanie, I'd be the main point of contact and can disseminate information as needed. But I think I guess my assumption was that this entire steering committee, or the folks that are on the group on the call today, would be your steering committee for the project.
Okay.
So I don't know how it suits you all, but I think the briefing meetings or the coordination calls could be similar to what we're doing right now, and we can stream it live on YouTube for anybody that's not able to be part of it or wants to catch up later, but that anyone on this work group can tune in at those specified dates and times for updates and to get more information. And then, since we'll have it recorded, we can, if people want to share it back to their boards or any of their supervisors, they can do that immediately after the meetings are over. But I mean, we want to be as transparent as possible, so yeah, just to get the information out there.
Yeah, excellent. So if we stick to this group here, then could we maintain this time on a Friday on a bi-weekly basis as our coordination call time so that we can just lock it in? Or if there's another time, that also works. And we can talk about it with Chet, but if anyone has any thoughts, since this is a kickoff meeting. If there are no comments, we can finalize it with Chet offline later.
Sounds good.
Okay.
And I guess, sorry, going back to the timeline, just kind of a heads up. I know that our board would want to have some sort of presentation, at least during the strategic assessment, seeing the results, kind of a briefing at some point.
Yes, so we plan to have we plan to send in tech memos, but also have some summary presentations for the main outcomes of the key deliverables along the way. So each of the yellow circles, which are the key deliverables, we plan to present them. We'll have some slides ready, as well as the tech memos.
That sounds great. And I think in terms of the overall schedule, I mean, the main thing that I want to be focused on is that I appreciate the flexibility and as we move through each phase, but the report needs to be submitted to the General Assembly by the end of June. And I'm gonna bear the responsibility for making sure we're on track for getting that done.
Yes, definitely. And speaking of which, then the next question is, what is the internal review process like for CVTA? And that's one of the questions that I had. Was your deliverable review process? So if we send in a tech memo on the week of the 12th, week of the 26th, and so on and so forth, how long does it take to turn it around, and how many days do you need? And for the final report in June 4th, is it just going to be everyone on this team, the work group, or are there other people that would need to also comment?
That's a good question. I would love some feedback. I mean, I know we have a technical advisory committee for the CVTA, which most of the folks on this call serve on. And I think that would be a natural place for a final report to get reviewed. But that group would still need to make a recommendation to the full authority, which is the elected officials. So I think we'll have to probably take some work backwards and figure out what the timing would be. Barb, Joe, Dorona, Adrian, do you all have any thoughts on who needs to review this and how it should move forward? I mean, I think the authority needs to accept it ultimately.
Right. And I agree with what you said, that it needs to route through the TAC, CVTA TAC.
I agree as well.
So with regard to comments on the interim deliverables, then we would ask that, I mean, since Chet, you would be the main person, our key contact, would it be better to receive comments through you, like one channel, or would you have everyone else just email us? I think it would be easier if everything is routed through you and then we receive comments at one time.
Absolutely, especially with the quick turnaround on this project.
Yeah.
I think one point of contact makes a lot of sense.
Okay, that works.
And I think, I mean, I'd love some feedback from everybody else. I don't think the interim steps need review by the full TAC. I would trust that this steering committee can handle that. But I mean, if anybody else disagrees with me, then I think the TAC review at the end of the process with the draft final report is probably sufficient. Otherwise, we're really going to need to switch up some of the milestones here.
This is Joe. I would agree with that, Chet. I think one review at the end would be sufficient.
Okay, I think that is, yeah, that works as well. So next is key contacts. I think, again, you've already introduced Adrian as a key contact. Is there anyone else at some of the, with the different stakeholders that you would definitely want us to reach out to as we continue this process?
Well, I think it goes without saying that Tiffany and her team at DRPT would be a key contact.
Okay.
Hey, chat, this is John with Ride Finders. I was just curious, as we're talking about key contacts, since Ride Finders is a division of GRTC and we handle van pooling, and that's considered public transportation, should we have a role or anything in this? What's your thoughts?
Yeah, absolutely, John. I mean, I would think when that you all be consulted when the stakeholder interviews are done.
Okay.
As one of the
because we have a different board set up than GRTC's. Ride Finders has its own advisory board and everything like that. So, okay.
Is Ride Finders contracting? Are you contractors to GRTC, or you're a division of the agency?
We're a division of GRTC.
Okay.
We handle the van pools and car pools and all of that.
Okay.
But we do have our own advisory board, and there's many that are on this call that do sit on that.
Okay, I think that works. I think we've covered the key questions that we had on our team in terms of the key goals and expectations. But I also like to open up again for any general expectations for the end of this project. So in your perspective, by the end of this project, I want to be able to X, Y, Z. So if you could fill in the blank, that would also help us in forming the rest of the decisions that we make moving forward. To really just hear from you and your expectations for this project.
Don't everybody speak at once.
I'll speak. This is Joe Vidunas again with Hanover. We don't have as large a stake as some of our other regional partners. We don't have public transit that extends into Hanover. But in my view, and I'm looking at a draft of the study objectives, would be to have a very clear, concise response to each of the objectives listed in the study scope of services. I think this needs to be very targeted. It was, the questions were specific, and I think we need to be as clear as possible in formulating responses to what was being asked, and not be careful not to go too far beyond those boundaries.
Understood. Thank you. Any other comments?
This is John with Ride Finders. I would just want to make sure that TDM and van pooling is kind of addressed in it as well. I know, that is a form of public transportation, and there are a lot of van poolers that do catch the bus to come into the localities and everything. So just want to make sure that TDM is part of that component as well.
Thank you. Well noted.
Stephanie, this is Diana. I just think with the recommendation in answering the specific questions posed by the legislation, that consideration for the current, the current structure, and specifically with the city of Richmond, our city council, and the county of Chesterfield with the stakeholders, and how whatever approach or options are given, that the consideration to how those structures would be handled would be very helpful for us.
Okay, so if I understand you, you're saying the City of Richmond City Council and the County of Chesterfield, you want to have a clear understanding of how the governance in those for those entities will change, or how it will be handled.
Yes,
that's correct. Okay.
And I would like to add to that, Stephanie. This is Lisa Guthrie at VTA. A question in my mind is not just the current governance, which is Richmond and Chesterfield on the GRTC board, but what about the funding that already occurs from Henrico in Richmond? And would this authority, if it changes, have jurisdiction over the funds that they choose to supplement to CVTAs? I guess I'm not clear on what the traditional funding stream has been versus this CVTA aspect of it. It's not clear to me.
Okay. So the impact of funding from some of the other stakeholders, other counties, and
The funding that comes from sources other than
Sources.
CVTA.
Yes, okay.
And I know, this is Tyrone again, and Stephanie, I know for maybe a starting point on that, where the legislation talks about a maintenance of effort and the threshold being 50% of what the localities, being specifically Henrico and Richmond, provided at a certain fiscal year, which I think it got negotiated back to what, FY19, Lisa, if you want to correct me. So that's the starting point of the threshold of what the localities must contribute currently to GRTC based on that legislation. And so I think the question talks about that, I guess, either growth of that or how that is impacted. At least we'll have to go further, but I think that's the starting point of where the localities are right now.
Ask a question here. So Dirana, just to make sure that I'm understanding your questions, basically is what you're asking about who's contributing and how that's being distributed and who's getting the service. What are are there any key concerns that you'd like to raise at this point?
Yeah, and I'm sorry if my question, Adrian has done a great job over the last couple of years explaining the distribution of where the funds go. So I have not any questions of that. Right now, I think I'm specifically talking about like distribution of power. And so existing, our city council currently, governs a lot of actions for GRTC. It started to become less now with more regional participation from Henrico and now Chesterfield, and the day-to-day operations of GRTC. But traditionally has been, really ran off of the city of Richmond's governing structure, ordinance and resolutions format. And again, like I said, they've broken a little bit away from that now. Even I think when you open your board meetings, you're quoting a City of Richmond code in order to have virtual meetings. So they rely on our council government for some of their fundamental things, foundational things right now. And the members of our council will want to know what impacts these changes have on that, as far as what they do right now and what they would be able to do in the future.
It's kind of a bifurcated approach, what the current funding is or what it had been up until CVTA, and then how do you layer on these additional participants with the regional money. So you had the local money and now you have the regional money, and how do you approach fairness and having to put together a governing body that reflects that level of effort?
Thanks, Lisa. Definitely. And here in the city, we've kind of coined that again, an equity credit in this now new system that would become. Where is that equity that our citizens have bared over the years shown in this new structure?
Thank you.
Thank you for that. I think that's all very interesting information. I had maybe a few follow-up questions, and this can be done. I can get more details on it, but with the member cities and counties in the CVTA, is there? Could you explain how the membership came about? And even though there may not be transit service in all those areas, what was the background, or what what was the purpose or how was this formed? Let me put it that way. As because it includes areas that do not currently have transit service, but may in the future have transit service.
Sure. The CVTA was formed as to mirror geographically the planning district, District 15, because of the regional nature of the planning district and the work it's done for the past 50 years. The CVTA, as we've talked, has access to tax revenues collected to use for all kinds of transportation work. 15% of that is directly used for transit improvements in the region. But our member jurisdictions, as Joe mentioned earlier, not everyone has transit systems, but they all have local roads and bicycle and pedestrian facilities and other types of transportation needs that can be improved using CVTA funds. So the CVTA works across all of those modes. We're focusing on transit for this governance report, but the geography still remains the same.
But Stephanie, to I think interviews with the previous stakeholders and current stakeholders, being the GRTC board, the current board, Chesterfield, Richmond, and Henrico, need to be interviewed to get a handle on that level of structure before you add in this additional piece here, to get a full flavor of what this transition or any changes may mean.
Okay, thank you. I'd like to open it up to the AECOM team, and if anyone has any questions, the AECOM team.
Oh, Stephanie, if I could, I'm sorry, before you go, you specifically asked a question about, or maybe Peter did, about how did the other localities agree on, putting their funds in. And I think that some parts of it, with the region really taking on a coordinated effort, everyone knew that GRTC, was the regional transit provider, and that a way to help really reduce the burden of growing cost on the localities that were currently funding GRTC was really some of the driving forces for especially Richmond and also Henrico in allowing this to be a way to relieve some of that pressure annually. So I know before it was, 16 million plus annually that the local government was contributing. And with, the creation of the 15% of the CVTA, it allowed that to drastically be cut in half. And I think that's some of what Lisa talks about too, on really finding the fair amount of those regional funds, as far as now that it's allowed that to cut in half. We do have another process going along to then determine, how to still keep GRTC afloat and made whole with the routes that they're providing in the areas. So we're readily trying to work there, as well as with the other process, to ensure that the rural localities or localities without specifically fixed route or transit service, that some forms of mobility services are provided to those other localities. And then to also go off of Lisa's comment about evaluating the current structure. Again, currently the GRTC, Richmond, Chesterfield, and Henrico are really the funding structure of GRTC, but are not representative of the board structure. And then again, with CVTA coming in with those additional localities, what roles, what if any, would they need to play on the board?
Thank you. Yes, those are good points. Making sure that, or not making sure, but just checking what the equity between the funding and the power, the representation on the board is or should be. I think that's also, it's always a key area where people want to make sure that if they're paying into something, they are represented in the right way. Scott, Rob, Peter, any questions you'd like to ask the steering committee?
I'd love to hear from Scott and Rob if you have anything to offer here.
I can get it off mute. I can ask a question. Is there? This is a fascinating set of questions that have been raised about the history of the funding flow and tracing the funding by percentages from source to use in terms of transit uses, and the representation on the various governing bodies and their influence. Are there any good resources, and I'm hoping primarily written resources that address this, that would be quick learning for us, or going back to Stephanie's question about contacts, does this discussion suggest any person who's particularly knowledgeable? And I'm thinking possibly somebody from the academic community. We sometimes find they're the most helpful, but not necessarily. Is there any sources of information about those questions?
Not really understanding exactly what exactly are you looking for? Just
so
background on the history of.
Yeah, ideally it would be a white paper on the funding and decision-making authority for transit expenditures in the region, or alternatively, perhaps an academic, a professor who has devoted some time to looking at these questions in the Richmond region.
I'm not aware of a white paper or anything to the academic level that documents specifically how things are broken down funding wise historically. I mean, I feel like our staff is pretty knowledgeable and has a pretty good sense of history as well as documentation. So I think just working with us, we should be able to give quite a bit of answers.
I'm sure we will, yes. Yeah,
I mean, as Dorona noted, and Alisa as well, I mean, we have a kind of complicated structure, and there's plenty of legislation that also will, I guess, justify all the different points that they've made out there, whether it's ordinances or MOUs or service agreements. We have all that information that will tie into the funding.
So, some of that will no doubt be of use to us.
Just a quick question on my end. So given the importance of making sure that marginalized communities are heard from, not just here in this region, but for all questions on governance and transportation, and how challenging it is to get people to weigh in on those issues, is given that they can be arcane. Do you have any advice or suggestions on how to reach and make sure that those voices are part of this work, or reflected in this work, appropriately reflected in this work?
There are organizations, social equity organizations, ridership organizations, and others like RVA Rapid Transit and others that you may want to consult with. Housing, how other policy areas interact with transit.
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think, I mean, Lisa, with your connections through CTAC and staff's connections with some of these groups like RVA Rapid Transit, we can probably get you started on a good contact list for those organizations.
Thank you. If there are no more questions, comments, or thoughts, I think we can end this here, and we'll follow up with Chet on finalizing the dates for the biweekly coordination calls for the steering committee. So thank you very much.
Sounds great. Yeah, and I don't think we have anything else on the agenda unless other folks have questions or comments to share today. Okay, so next steps, we will, staff will coordinate with AECOM and ENO and get back to folks with a slate of potential meeting dates and times between now and the end of the year, and we'll make sure that we have items on the TAC agenda for May or June, however that works out, to get it back in front of the TAC and move forward to the full authority in time to get a report done for the General Assembly.
And I'm assuming I can expect probably a long, detailed list of requests next week, as well as stakeholders interviews to be.
Correct.
Okay.
And then I have a question about the CVTA stakeholders. So I'm assuming that each of the authority members, those will be who you will be talking with, and check, you know, will there be like, will you give them the staff contact for the mayor in our case in order for the scheduling and all of that to occur?
Yeah, that's a great question because some people are easier to reach than others. I would suggest that we go through TAC members and then possibly even have group calls, since we're doing all of this virtually, so that we can get, I think the scope allotted for 10 interviews, and we want to make sure that we maximize the utility of those to get everyone involved that needs to be involved. So it's going to take a little bit of work to come up with the most representative group of stakeholders to include. But we could certainly pass that around by email and make sure everyone's in agreement before we finalize the list.
Yeah, because I know Todd, you're from Henrico, the tax chair, definitely wanted to know who would be interviewed as well as the interview questions.
Yeah, and Sharon's here too. But yes, I think we could certainly, that shouldn't be a secret to anyone before the interviews happen.
Okay, thank you.
Anyone else have questions or comments before we break? Okay, thanks everybody. I appreciate the time, AECOM, and we're looking forward to getting this project underway. So hope everyone has a great weekend, and we will talk soon. Look for emails next week.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.